Hey guys, welcome to the Great Debate Community. My name is Richard and I have General Han Solo here. Tonight we're just talking nonsense. We don't have too many topics prepared. We've got a few that we were talking about off air and we'll go into a few of those. But before we get started, Robert has something he wants to play for us. So Robert, go ahead.
Jana Gana Mana Adhinayaka Jaya He Bharata Bhagya Vidhata Punjaba Singhu Gujarata Maratha Dravida Utkala Banga Vindhya Himachala Yamuna Ganga Unchala Jalare Taranjatava Sudha Namayage Tave Sudha Asiya Mage Gahitava Gajaya. Okay, that I give up.
Okay.
I just couldn't help.
Yeah, Robert, just stop that video because I can hear it.
Okay. That's not me. Sorry, guys.
Oh, that was weird. That was from, okay, so I actually had the GDC video up and it started playing an advertisement, so that's what that was. That was weird.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So yeah, thank you, Robert, for that.
That was just embarrassing. That was me embarrassing myself. So forgive me.
Well, we don't really have many viewers tonight. But thank you for that tribute to the great nation of India. We all pledge our support to the Indian people. Okay, so here's something, Robert. A few days ago, I was telling a friend of mine who is actually a biologist and a young Earth creationist that young Earth creationism needs to take seriously the discoveries that come out of the ancient Near East. And if there were a piece of scholarship from a young Earth creationist perspective that confronted ancient Near Eastern challenges, I would take that seriously, and I would eagerly read or watch something like that. Do you know of anything like that? Like a young Earth creationist that does that?
I think the only young creationist I've ever come across that does that, and him being a professional, would be Todd Wood.
Todd Wood. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only real responses I've heard to ancient Near Eastern stuff is just dismissive, like saying that it challenges biblical inerrancy or something like that. Oh, and by the way, to anyone who's watching, this is open. If you go into the master chat list that Steve McRae started, you can join this hangout. It's not just Robert and I talking. Anyone can join. But for now, it's just General Han Solo and Richard talking nonsense.
Yeah. Robert's life.
Yep. So yeah, just go into the hangout invite list, the master thing that Steve started, and you guys can join, and we will start debating each other or something. So yeah.
Yeah. So curiously, I haven't seen any young creationist like respond to the ancient Near Eastern material. Especially in the sense that they haven't actually studied it.
Yeah.
But I do remember a guy named Benjamin. I think his last name is Stanhope. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But he has a blog, and in that blog he says that this is back in like 2014, he visited Ken Ham's Creation Museum and started laughing at the ridiculousness of because he's a theology student that seems to be another Heiser fan and heavily involved in the ancient Near East, and he noted really funny anachronistic work art. So for example, the Ten Commandments in Ken Ham's museum is written in the Masoretic text script, not the Paleo Hebrew script that Moses would have had it in. Just funny stuff like that. And now Ken Ham did actually respond to that, but he called him a little boy, like literally, he called him a little boy that hasn't gone to seminary and hasn't he's not a scholar in the field, and that Ben is totally wrong. And then Ben responded again saying, hang on a second, I'm actually doing like a master's thesis and this and that. And Ken Ham didn't respond to that. So, yeah.
Robert, I hear like squeaking, like you're killing a rat or something.
I'm sorry. It's just Australian outback. It's all these birds that are probably, because of the onset of summer, they're reproducing babies. And yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, that's what happens. They build nests and then they have sex.
Oh, why are you like right next to it?
I'm actually not. I'm deep in my dungeon, and you can still hear them.
Oh. I actually had a weird dream last night about birds. I had a dream that I had some sort of weird skin condition, and it was making me go blind, and it was making my skin turn orange. And then some people were making fun of me, making fun of my disease, and they said that I looked like a bird. So yeah, that's it. That's my dream.
That is quite unusual, Richard. Coincidentally, it matches with the creepiness of birds.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Coming through my headphones and.
So yeah, I wanted to talk about biblical inerrancy today. We were going to do a hangout on that, but I don't know. We haven't really gotten around to it. You have anything that you had prepared for that? Because I know you woke up just to do that hangout, and then I was like, no, Robert, I'm doing other things.
No, I didn't prepare any notes. I don't know if you have any questions though, or like what your position is. So.
Yeah, I'm a little unclear about your position and how you hold your position, given your view of the ancient Near Eastern cosmology in the Bible. I mean, the way that I summarized it in an article that I wrote was that it was basically an ancient Near Eastern cosmology was basically an anthropomorphism, so that wouldn't compromise inerrancy. So that would be my view of it. I hold to inerrancy. Okay, what about you? Okay, Robert said that he will be right back. I think Robert would make a distinction between different types of inerrancy. Robert would want to talk about the way that the text is written, like the mechanical view, like say, for example, in what Muslims believe about the Quran, that the exact words in Arabic are themselves God's word, whereas as Christians, we would believe that okay, Robert's back. As Christians, we would believe that the propositional content, like the content behind a statement, was what is God's word and what is inerrant. And again, if any atheists want to join to come on and challenge us, you guys are more than welcome to. We've got the master list in Steve's little chat room thing, but unfortunately, it's also midnight, so we're not sure how many people we're going to get in here. Robert, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So yeah, my view on inerrancy is basically not like to explain it easily, not like the Islamic version, where it's mechanical and every letter is like what God,
Yeah.
He couldn't say it any other way, like that. He only had that specific string of letters and words. So, for example, John 1:1, we understand it to mean in the beginning was the Logos, right? If he worded it any other way, but had the same message or the same thought in mind, then that's fine. And so the inerrancy part is basically the message, not specifically what language it's written in and so on.
I was saying that while you were gone, that inerrancy is about the propositional content. Okay, so there is a distinction. Like as far as I'm concerned, I think the inerrancy debate is a debate between Christians. Like it's an in-house debate. Like obviously we can have the debate with atheists, but inerrancy is something that Christians debate within themselves. Like in theological discourse, we talk about the inerrantist position versus the infallibilist position. The inerrantist position is basically what most of us are familiar with, where there are no errors in the Bible, whereas the infallibilist position would say that there are errors in the background details of the Bible, but in everything that it attempts to do, it succeeds. So that would kind of skirt past the argument that God's message is failing, because obviously the whole premise of inerrancy is that God can't be wrong. And if there are errors in the Bible, well, that contradicts that. But the infallibilist position is that God is trying to relay a certain message, and if he relays that message, then the background details don't matter as much, and you can have contradictory accounts so long as the everything related to faith and morals is intact. So, Robert, which of those do you think you would fall into?
Yeah, so like an accommodationist view of inerrancy.
Yeah.
And
that would be a little different, even, but yeah.
Okay, maybe you can explain why. Like, I don't mind hearing your point on that.
I mean, I think accommodationism would fall more into the inerrantist position, because accommodationism is basically like we're talking, for example, about the cosmology in the Old Testament, where God is condescending down to the level of the reader and communicating in a way that they understand. And like I was telling you off air, it's basically, or maybe that was on air, I can't remember, in anthropomorphism. So it would be similar to God saying that he's changed his mind, or that he has a face or hands or something like that. He's speaking in a way that people understand. So I think that this would be consistent with the inerrantist view, that there are no errors in the Bible.
Yeah, and that's the irony of the whole thing, is where I say, hey, Genesis 1, for example, is completely in line and consistent and accurate with the cosmology of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Because say if it wasn't, right? Like say if it was only like what a concordance would say it as, then it's not inerrant, because then it's wrong as far as an ancient Near Eastern's perspective is concerned, and God has completely alienated that audience. So the fascinating thing about inerrancy is that it's consistent for all cultures.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing about it.
What's kind of funny is that I can say the Bible, the authors of the Bible believed in and incorporated a flat Earth into their teaching, and yet the Bible is also inerrant.
Right.
So there are different kinds of errors. We're kind of touching on internal versus external errors. Like an internal error or contradiction would be something like page 1 says A, page 2 says not A, or, something like that. Whereas what we're talking about here is the Bible says something about the scientific realm, whereas the scientific realm says something different. So these are different types of contradictions that we're dealing with. So what about like internal things, like say, do you have a problem with saying that page 1 says A and page 2 says not A? Could you
well, again, it depends on the book, or if it's not within the same book. So I know the atheist critics who, to be quite frank, they just don't know what they're talking about. Well, most of them. They'll mention things like, there's a verse in Proverbs that says one gives a certain ethical approach to something, and then maybe Jesus says something else and it contradicts what's mentioned in Proverbs.
Yeah.
So now you have Solomon in Proverbs speaking and utilizing a certain ethical approach from Egyptian texts, which is fascinating when you look into the composition of Proverbs in that context. and then some other text somewhere else, centuries removed, speaking about another ethic that may sound the same, and yet can be approached, at surface level, may seem contradictory. But actually, when you digest all of it together, there is no contradiction. I guess examples need to be given, I think, if that's going to be discussed. But yeah.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of doing.
But if it's within the same book,
channel.
though, if it's within the same book, so for example, Rachel Oates, she recently in a video response to G-Man, which, by the way, I think like criticizing what he was saying. She gave examples where in Matthew 5 you have Jesus saying that your righteousness should be shown to everyone, so that everyone can learn from you. And then literally the very next chapter in chapter 6, Jesus says that you should not show your righteousness to other people. So there's an example where within the same book you have an apparent contradiction. Yeah.
You still there?
Yeah, I'm still, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to say something.
Yeah, I heard that, and I thought about writing up a comment responding to it, but I don't know. I didn't think it was worth the time to. So I think.
Yeah, I was thinking of making a video as well on that video.
Yeah, I mean, I did too, but then I was like, no, that's not really worth my time.
Yeah.
Especially since what you have is G-Man making a video in response to Rachel, then Rachel making a video in response to G-Man, and then I'm making a video in it's just like an endless stream of me playing videos, of them playing videos, and of G-Man playing a video. It just seems weird. So I didn't want to do that. But yeah, I think the message of what Christ is saying there wouldn't conflict with one another, because it would all be about what's driving you. If what's driving you is pleasing other people, or rather glorifying yourself, kind of building yourself up by doing these good works, then yeah, I think that's kind of what Christ is getting at there.
Yeah.
So it's
the interesting thing is that I looked into some scholarly material. So D.A. Carson. So before I get into that, he when I read the stuff, when I read commentaries on these verses and these commentaries are back in the 1980s. It's interesting to note that Christians came across this stuff and they already engaged with it. So these so-called contradictions are not new.
Oh yeah.
It's not like, oh, you just you've caught us off guard. So
yeah,
this stuff has been around for 2,000 years, and Christians have been answering, or commentating on this stuff.
I think it was Steve McRae, who was telling me the other day how impressed he was with these long lists of contradictions that you find on atheist websites, and most of the contradictions are I don't think very challenging. I think a lot of them are stupid. Some of them could be challenging, but a lot of them are not, strictly speaking, contradictions. For example, if you have two accounts of Jesus going somewhere, and in one account it says Jesus was with 3 people, and in another account it says he was with 4. Those don't strictly contradict each other unless it says only 3 or only 4. It's the same
if I was reading a Bible that was you can tell that it's engineered around trying to iron out any contradictions.
Yes.
You can tell there's been a group think involved. that would be suspicious. You know, the message would not showcase any form of authentic flavor to it, and then then you know it's a forgery.
Actually, I don't know if you were in the Hangout the other day with DPR, but he asked a question related to this. He said something like, "Why would the accounts be different at all if they're all eyewitnesses?" And what I told him was that if he and I, like if DPR and I, were both to write an account of that Google Hangout, the people reading the account would say these two accounts contradict each other, even though we're both there. And even though both of our accounts are more or less accurate, aside from, you know, our interpretation of the other person's arguments. So having discrepancies in two different accounts, like you said, it kind of shows a little more legitimacy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So another one that Rachel brought up in that video that you're talking about is the hanging of or the death of Judas. Like he died in differing ways in the Bible. In one he hung himself, and in another I can't remember what it was, but maybe he fell down.
Apparently he fell off a cliff and
like
his guts gushed out or something like that.
Yeah, that's it. Something I've read about that is this idea of hanging yourself is, I don't know if you know anything about this, is kind of an idiom for dying a traitor's death. Like it's kind of like, or maybe it's related to in Deuteronomy, where it says that cursed is he who hangs on a tree. So it's kind of like you're dying a shameful death or a traitor's death. So when they say he hung himself, it could mean something like that. What do you think? Have you heard anything like that?
Yeah, I've also even heard like theories mention about how his very name denotes that you know, he choked himself, and so that's why he got the name. I don't really buy into that. I think his name and all this, well, specifically his name, I think it comes from his location, where he hailed from, and yeah, I've seen the Deuteronomy reference. I don't know if that would actually match, because don't forget Deuteronomy is about Canaanite, you know, laws, and so. But otherwise, as far as his death itself, again, where's the contradiction between Matthew's account and Acts?
Right. I mean, strictly speaking, it wouldn't be a contradiction because you could join them together and like give a whole narrative of Judas hanging himself and then crashing into the ground.
Yeah. I think the problem that most Christians would have explained is who bought the field. And curiously, who bought the field? You know, when it says that the high priest bought it, and then Acts says he bought it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for the atheists who might be interested, the notion, the fact that Matthew quotes from Zechariah 11 and Jeremiah 32, there's a fascinating, I mean, and don't forget Matthew's writing to a Jewish audience, so there's a fascinating insight into the 30 pieces of silver and what Zechariah represented in Zechariah, Zechariah's context in Zechariah 11. That basically, you know, just to summarize the story, is that so I'm going to the story itself. So this is in verse, let's see, verse 7. So it says, "So I became shepherd of the flock marked for slaughter, paying attention to the oppressed of the flock. I took 2 staffs, naming one Pleasant and the other one Union. And then I passed through the flock. In a single month, I got rid of 3 shepherds because I grew tired of them, and they despised me. So I said, I will no longer be your shepherd. Let those who are about to die perish, and let what is about to be destroyed be destroyed. As for the survivors, let them devour each other." So this is Zechariah speaking, but God, through Zechariah, is giving them a metaphorical account of their relationship with him. And so he continues, then I took the staff that I named Pleasant and broke it, showing I was breaking my covenant that I had made with all of the people. It was broken at that time, so the oppressed of the flock who were observing me would know that it had been a message from the Lord. I told them, and so this is Zachariah speaking, if it's all right with you, pay me what I've earned, but if it isn't, don't. So they paid out what I had earned, 30 shekels of silver. Then the Lord told me, throw the money into the treasury, that magnificent value they placed on me. So I took the 30 shekels of silver, threw them into the treasury of the temple of the Lord. Then I broke my second staff, the one I named Union, breaking the union between the house of Judah and the house of Israel. So ultimately what this means is 30 shekels of silver is like a penny's worth. And their idea of Yahweh is 30 shekels of silver. And after all that God has done for this particular group, they pay Zechariah that much money. And so God is very sarcastic. Throw that money into the treasury, that magnificent value. And so now Matthew then takes that story and then applies it to Jesus, that look what, not only what Judas did, but the high priest, that technically they both bought the field. So in Matthew's account, the high priest bought the field, and basically it was blood money for them because they killed God on the cross. The analogy fits. And then Luke in Acts is wanting to make the point that because of the guilt of what's his name, Judas,
mm-hmm.
And what he did, that he also was part of that deal, and so that's why he died a gruesome death.
I've never heard that before, but if that holds up, then that will have a subtle implication for the deity of Christ, won't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's the whole notion of how the New Testament uses the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And these fascinating parallels.
Hey, so Steve is talking nonsense in the live chat, and I told him to come in here, but he won't. I dared him, but he's afraid to come in and challenge us.
Let's see. As written, there can be contradictions that it's nothing to do if they are resolved or not.
Yeah, well, he's talking about like if you have one account as this passage is written, it will contradict another account as it is written. But I mean, it doesn't, because if you can merge the accounts without compromising either one, then there's no contradiction. All you can say is that at face value, they appear to contradict each other, which we would agree with.
Right.
So typically, what Christians will say here, or what you'll learn in a undergraduate theology course, like a 101 class, is that there are apparent contradictions in the Bible, which upon further examination could be resolved if put in their proper context. One of the problems that I have with these big lists of contradictions is that they are actively looking for contradictions, and when you do that, you're going to find something that fits your criteria, because you have a very low standard for what is a contradiction. Because I mean, anyone can do that. You can look at any like scientific journal or something and say, look, as written, this paragraph contradicts this paragraph down here. But if you're respecting the author's intention and what he means to express, and you are not actively looking for a contradiction, then that is not going to work.
Right.
So, okay, let me ask you this: do you think inerrancy is something that you have to believe by faith, or is there some sort of argument that you could give for inerrancy? I think there are arguments that you can give for trusting in certain parts of the Bible, in pretty critical parts, but is there an argument that you can give for believing that the Bible itself is without error?
Not initially, like as not if you were completely unaware of this thing called the Bible, you can't presuppose that this is some perfect book.
Yeah.
I've always told people to, if they, especially people who claim to be Christian and have never read the Bible, like as if I became a Christian last week because I heard this message for the first time and I've given my life to Jesus. No, I'm not denying that there could be some genuine spiritual experience they may have felt and hence they, became Christian.
Right.
But I, knowing after 8 years worth of looking into this stuff, there's so much we don't know that I kind of go, you know what? All these so-called claims that, because immediately they'll say things like, the Bible's perfect and, the Bible's inerrant and so on. That is completely based on a faith statement that they can't prove. And yeah, so I kind of cringe going, you know what? I would be a little bit more skeptical in that approach because what can happen is if you can believe it like that, hook, line, and sinker, then whatever denominational status your church has, so if they happen to be young earth, you will fall into that young earth thinking, and you will be mincemeat to atheists.
Yeah.
And then, sure enough, you could be an atheist later on down the track, like once you actually start to have a critical analysis. And so to avoid that, what I tell people is, look, just treat the Bible as a historical document. Don't even put the label religion on top of it. It is a historical document. Well, full of documents, really, of actual human beings writing in history. And on that basis, you don't label it as true or false. You just read it in light of the historical context it's written in, and then see if there's any uniqueness about it. And from what I've done, I've done that, and from what I can see, there's a lot of things mentioned. So, for example, if I was to look at Ezekiel, there are things in Ezekiel that ancient Near Eastern scholars require to understand Babylonian customs. Ironically, there's a lot of things missing in history that Ezekiel fills in the gaps. Now, I find that fascinating if it's a quote-unquote religious text.
That is actually, I think, related to inerrancy or objections to inerrancy, because if you're bringing out contradictions in the text, especially about ancient documents, when we're talking about ancient literature, there's a lot that we don't understand and a lot of scholarly research that has to go into things. So if you're going to just naively just say, oh, that's a contradiction or something like that, it could just be that you are not understanding the full scope of the scholarly research, because ancient documents can be complicated to understand.
Right.
Something else.
There's so much to say, and yet it's hard to condense it down to like a 2-minute.
Yeah. Something else. I totally agree. Encouraging people to look at it as a human document, because if you're over eager about presenting it as the Word of God, you'll forget that it is a human document, and that can be challenging to your faith when you see things like ancient Near Eastern cosmology in the Bible. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people who become atheists. They see this kind of thing and they weren't really looking at the Bible as a human document. They're looking at it only as the Word of God, kind of like how a Muslim will view the Quran. This is actually a point that I appreciate from Peter Enns. I don't agree with everything Peter Enns has said, but in his book Incarnation and Inspiration, he basically argued that since there are two dimensions to the Bible, both God and man, we have to pay attention to the part that is from man, or I mean, the whole Bible is from man, but we have to keep that in mind. Otherwise, we're going to be led astray, and we might become young Earth creationists or something like that because we're forgetting that man is playing a role in composing these books. Have you
So, I maybe what I can do is I can read out a discussion I had very briefly on Facebook with, believe it or not, Douglas, the guy from the Pine Creek. Well, have you heard me speak about him before? Pine Creek?
I'm not sure.
Douglas. So he's the guy on. He does street epistemology. Anyway, he remember I told you how he booted me out from his Hangout a few months ago. Anyway, it's long story short, but so on Facebook he so Jonathan McClatchy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a nice guy.
Yeah.
He wrote a guest post for me a while ago.
Right. So Jonathan McClatchy, he was interviewed by Douglas on his Pine Creek channel. And Douglas, I find to be interesting because he avoids me. Whenever I happen to be around, ever since that discussion I had with him in his Hangout, he's always, for some reason, avoided me. So he writes here, in this long discussion on Facebook, he says something about, okay, I'll just read from this point on. He says, David, he's speaking to a friend of mine named David. So are you saying you do have this ability to tell the difference between two people who claim meaning and purpose in their lives without knowing their beliefs? Question. So David says, without knowing their beliefs? No, it would require interrogation. You are trying to short-circuit the process of investigation of relevant data and evidence. No one here would advocate that. Then Douglas responds, okay, but that's my point. Someone could state that they have true meaning and purpose in their life. They could seem fulfilled, content, happy, etc. But you would say they are wrong if they are a non-Christian. Are a Christian, maybe a Jew. Am I wrong about this? So David didn't respond to that question. But then what actually what caught my attention was this notion of being wrong. So if I'm a Christian, then automatically everything else is wrong, and only the Christian worldview is correct. So this is where I chimed in, and I said, Douglas, why would a well-learned Christian ever agree that, quote, they are wrong? There are truths in Islam, for example, but Islam doesn't have an epistemic efficiency for the world. Like I told you in a Hangout months ago, we're comparing models of reality, all of which are directed by finite, fallible men, hence the importance of the scientific method. But is there a model that has a providential hand at work? So you just mentioned that the Bible is orchestrated by humans.
Right.
There's human flavors within it, and so that's why I'm bringing this up, is because I asked this question to Doug. I said, is there a model, a worldview model that's been written down by humans, but has a providential hand at work? But we can see that, oh, look, there's something from outside the system guiding their thinking and so on. And so I said, I claim it is Christianity. Why? Because I have, to the best of my ability, exhausted Islam as much as I have Christianity, using the scientific method. And so far, Christianity wins out. Mm-hmm. And then I went on to say that as a Christian, I don't deny the existence of Allah or any of the other gods because of the whole, divine council worldview. And then he completely sidestepped my comment and went straight to David. And he says, so David, you said if you left Christianity and became an atheist, you would be in despair with no true meaning and purpose. But all of my questions were designed to show that people do claim to have meaning and purpose in their lives. And even if they are wrong about that, it doesn't matter because they are not despairing and they think they have true meaning and purpose. The only real issue left then is in the afterlife for being wrong. Christianity is a religion of carrots and sticks. So in a very simple, short statement, I then said, Douglas, the Christian hope and message is ironically unique among any other epistemological framework. Ultimately, is there a solution to chaos Kampf? If so, how is that possible? So if there's a solution to chaos, how is that possible? And then I said, Christianity says theosis in Jesus. So maybe if you want, you can direct the discussion in that direction. Is Christianity the only unique message that mentions this thing called theosis, and that therefore that truly designates, what it means to have it as the gospel good news, that no other epistemological framework, no other religion offers that as a solution to chaos?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I know that in say a religion like Islam, what you will have is Muslims who say that God is so far above humanity and above this world that we can't compare ourselves to him. So they'll say things like God has no son, God doesn't beget a son, and then you'll have other philosophies which will literally say that God is ineffable. He's totally unknowable and unknown. We can't really know anything about him at all, and we're not like him. In Christianity, what we have, the solution to chaos is that when Christ died on the cross, he defeats the powers of darkness, and as we are progressing toward the end of all time, where Christ will raise all of us from the dead, we are becoming more like him. This is what the Bible refers to as being conformed to the image of the Son in Romans 8:29. So we're becoming more like him, and this is called sanctification. So once we get to this final state, it's called glorification, where we finally achieve this resurrected body in its glorified state, which resembles the resurrection of Christ. So at that point, we have achieved theosis, and we'll have inherited a world that doesn't have chaos or sin or evil in it. So it would just be a glorified world. Is that kind of where you're going, Robert?
Yeah. And is Christianity, the religion, is it the only religion that advocates such an idea?
I know that there are religions that will advocate for a sort of utopia, but that isn't really what we're talking about. Like, that's part of it, but it's not totally what we're talking about. So what we're talking about is us becoming like Christ, us being conformed to the image of the Son. And as far as I know, Christianity would be unique in that sense. And hey, Thaddeus,
Exactly. Right.
Thaddeus has joined. How's it going, Thaddeus?
It's going. Go ahead, keep doing your thing.
Okay.
Yes. Would that like, does the Quran offer such a paradigm? I don't see it.
Yeah. So
does Hinduism offer such a thing? I don't see it in Hinduism.
Right. So like I said, what we'll see in other religions, I don't think it would be theosis. It would be us, or a spiritual soul or something going into a paradise or a utopia. But I don't know if it would be a theosis. in the sense.
But you see the mechanics of how we get there, and then how we relate to the quote unquote being is so vague in other religions, whereas in Christianity it's very specific.
Yeah, that's
it actually gives you the process of how that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get what you mean. So
yeah,
I mean, in Christianity, with the death and resurrection of Christ, we have like the actual, like, a picture of the triumph over sin, and the mechanism for how we will, or how Christ has overcome this world, and how we are going to join in him and as triumphers over this world, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So inerrancy, did we lose that topic?
No, I think it's still in line with that. Because if it's errant, then we would be completely flip a coin if that hope is true or not.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
More people should join. Why is it just you?
I don't. Maybe because it's midnight, or 1 a.m. rather here. Another reason could be that Steve McRae has totally changed the format and isn't allowing me to post it in the GDC anymore. So total fascist move.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I see what's going on. Well, it's not midnight here in the real time, but yeah.
So yeah, the reason I actually asked you, Robert, about whether there would be an external argument for inerrancy is that I actually had one in mind, and I wanted to hear what you thought of it. So it would start with the idea that the Bible is a collection of documents written by human beings. So just take that assumption, not taking the assumption that the Bible is divinely inspired. And then if you use the canons of historical investigation regarding Jesus and his ministry, the things he said, and his death and resurrection, then you will have the conclusion that, or grant this part at least, you'll have the conclusion that Christ rose from the dead and that he's Lord. With that being the case, what was Christ's view of Scripture? If Christ's view of Scripture was that it was inerrant, then inerrancy should be true. Another way of putting it would be that the religion that the man who rose from the dead left behind is more likely to be true, and that would include the doctrine of inerrancy. Now, I know that this would bring with it the assumption that the history entails that Christ rose from the dead, like the canons of historical investigation will lead to that conclusion. But let's ignore that for a moment, because I just want to talk about whether that argument itself would work, even if we grant that. So if you grant every step of this argument, do you think the conclusion would follow? Do you think inerrancy would follow if Christ rose from the dead? And we can glean that from secular sources, or not secular sources, but we can glean that from secular investigation, and that he believed that the Bible is inerrant. Do you think that would be a valid conclusion?
Yeah. I don't see that. I mean, if that was, let's say we had absolutely no way of so up until the resurrection, right? So all the Old Testament, everything right up until the resurrection, we basically the death and resurrection. We didn't have any form of, say, valid historical data, but at the same time, we have this person named Jesus saying that all the stuff that's happened is valid.
Yes.
And the only thing that we do have is, the fact of the resurrection and his death. Then, in a very limited way, in Bible archaeology, it's called a minimalist view. So, in a very minimalist way, the fact that this person said all of that is true and he rose from the dead, that would be sufficient reason to believe what he said about the rest of the details.
Right.
But obviously, for certain minds, that's still not enough, because they want a little bit more than that, and I get that. Like me myself, I'm kind of like that. So what I do is I go, okay, yeah, from a minimalist point of view, that's sufficient for me to believe, say, the Jonah story, but I'll go beyond and look at Jonah myself.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that.
Is that where you were wanting?
Yeah, totally.
Like, is that what you're trying to get at? Like,
totally. Yeah. You nailed it. And I agree. I wouldn't say that the resurrection would absolutely like seal the deal, that it would prove that everything is true, but it would give us reason to believe it, unless you're going to say that unless you're saying that Christ rose from the dead naturally or something like that, like he just sat up out of his grave without divine intervention. But given
sorry about that.
Yeah, you've got your bird mating.
You better be sorry about that.
Yeah, but given
that was a pretty intense moment.
But given the claims of his ministry, like that he's all of his claims to be God, and that he would rise from the dead, given all of that, the fact, if we grant the fact that he did, then that would be, I think, pretty powerful evidence for inerrancy. But again, this requires that you grant every step of the argument.
Yeah.
Presuppositions.
So what I decided to do was do exactly that. So far, I've looked at Genesis, and then I next looked at Noah's flood, and currently I'm looking at the Exodus, and sometimes my hair stands on them to see the remarkable overlap of data and how these accounts match.
Yeah,
it's quite remarkable.
Yeah. And I do find, hey, we've got Ochiwawa in here. Hey, Ochi, how's it going?
Hey, the philosopher. What's going on, dude?
Hey, not much.
Ochiwawa, what's your view of inerrancy?
I hold to the infallibist.
So you think that there are errors, just not in areas like faith or morality?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, if people say that the Bible teaches a flat Earth, I'm not 100% sold on that, but the fact that it would, if it did say that, then that's perfectly consistent in my view, because I don't think the point of the Bible was to teach whether the Earth was flat or not. So,
does it say anything about NASA?
Ochiwawa,
No?
I mean,
Okay.
I think, I take a kind of a similar position, but maybe a little more nuanced, because I'm not an infallibilist. I would be more of an inerrantist, but I also think that the Bible does say or presuppose that the Earth is flat because it has ancient Near Eastern cosmology. But the way that I would describe it, and I think General here would describe it, is that it's kind of like an anthropomorphism. So God is coming down to our level, or rather the human level, and accommodating them as much as he can without compromising his message. So if that means speaking within the context of ancient Near Eastern cosmology, then so be it. That's what he does, and it's I wouldn't think that compromises in inerrancy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think as well. But it would still mean there's errors. It's just that that's not the point.
Well, no, I wouldn't see it like that. It's kind of like, and I don't even know what your view of this kind of thing is, but it's kind of like when God says that he changes his mind. Like, unless you're an open theist, you wouldn't take that strictly literally. It's an anthropomorphism. Or when God says that he has wings, or that he has a face, so I wouldn't call any of those an error. It's just God accommodating the audience.
Yeah, we have to see. We'll have to see what General's Google Drive says about it to be sure. We don't know. We're just fallible human beings.
I think it's funny that we have 3 Christians in here, and we're all agreeing that the Bible says that the Earth is flat.
Yay! Good. Now the flat earthers can leave us alone. We agree. Let's move on.
Yeah, that's not so uncommon these days.
Yeah, I mean, the difference would be that we're not flat earthers.
Oh.
Yeah, the guy in the chat, his name Arkin Logos, he's a flat earther, and he claims that I said that the ark landed 3,000 feet or something, which I never did, or the waters rose 3,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but seriously, like, what do you expect out of a bunch of people that believe in a spinning ball rocket?
And then he's arguing about the location, which I'm saying is Urartu, not Ararat. And it's like, no, it says Ararat.
We need to get you guys on Flat elected. You'd be fun.
Tell him to come in.
He would never do that.
Yeah, people are saying that.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess he's more afraid to come in here than Steve is, because I tried to get Steve to come in to raise his objections.
So Steve, that's not Arcane Logos?
Oh.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Oh man, I just realized they didn't have cameraman on, so anyone could have totally come in here and sniped us. But it's on now.
What is this cameraman? Like, even if you run your own Hangout, like, what, you have to have it on? Even if you don't give the link out?
Okay, so it's basically when people join the Hangout, they are darkened for a few seconds so they can't access anything in the room. So then I can look at them and say, okay, I know that person, and then either let them in or boot them.
You know the thing that the Bible thumping wingnut abuses.
Yeah.
I'll bring in Hunter. He's cool.
Hunter? Yeah, tell him to come in.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just message
Sure he's
Hunter.
cool?
Yeah, he was in Hunter was in the live chat.
Yeah, I know.
He's beautiful.
So I don't know. The way that I would see the anthropomorphism wouldn't be so much a. I guess the way I would say it's not so much an error as an incomplete description, an imperfect description.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because if you take it like in a scientific context, like if you're saying, okay, this is giving an accurate scientific account, I don't think you could even say incomplete. It would just be wrong, because the Earth doesn't rest on pillars. Right.
And then I guess some of the things they say about God, like that he has hands, could not be interpreted in any other way than metaphorical. So. Right, yeah.
Now, Richard, to give an example of oh, by the way, Hunter, I sent you the link in the Hangout chat. So
you should get
I'll give you an example of from the Quran where inerrancy just wouldn't work at all, especially in light of the mechanical perspective. So in the Quran, it says that Abraham was saved from the fire of the Chaldeans. Many times, in fact, it says it like 5 different times. And that, unfortunately, is derived from a myth that arose from the 2nd century AD onwards. So what happened was a scribe wanted to convert the Hebrew text, the entire Old Testament, into an Aramaic form, kind of like the Samaritan Pentateuch, but even though the Samaritan Pentateuch was much earlier, this is kind of like a new translation. And he came across the word Or of Chaldea in Genesis 11. And Or in Hebrew means fire. Now, this is why ancient Near Eastern studies are important, because Or in Chaldean, or in the Ugaritic language, means a fortified city. It doesn't mean fire, but since the spelling is practically the same as in Hebrew, and phonetically it sounds the same. Any Hebrew person looking at the word or will think fire, not fortified city. And so he looks at that and goes, oh, Abraham was saved from the fire of the Chaldeans, not realizing it should be city. And then he conjured up an entire myth on, well, how was what was going on with that? Maybe Abraham destroyed the idols of the Chaldeans, and so the Chaldeans put him into like a furnace, drawing from imagery from Daniel when
maybe it was a transdimensional fire. You never know.
And so yeah, an entire myth came out of that for at least 4 or 5 centuries. Now here's something fascinating. Jerome actually believed the myth. Jerome in the Latin, in the Vulgate, he says, it's in the Vulgate, that Abraham was saved from the fire of the Chaldeans. He actually uses the Latin word for fire, because he also mistranslated the word. So now here we have a problem. Now we have a translation of the Bible in Latin, all right, by the 3rd and 4th century. We have certain Jewish people at the time using the Aramaic, believing this thing. Then 2 centuries later, which would be 6th, 7th century, it would be Muhammad. And it's already distilled down into pre-Islamic Arabia. And lo and behold, the Quran follows that exact same story. Now here's the point. We know it's a mistranslation because of our studies in Ugaritic. So if Allah was genuinely behind the transmission of the Quran, like letter for letter, mechanically inspiring Gabriel to give it to Muhammad, what you have to then agree with is the fact that if he includes the story, this mythical story, that means Allah for all eternity, because in Islam, the Quran is eternal because it comes from Allah. So for all eternity, Allah was ignorant of the Ugaritic language. And he didn't know about the fact that Ur should mean city, not fire. And that whole story is a myth. So, if we translate that to the Bible, are there examples in the Bible where that amount of error is involved? And so far I haven't found any, but that's to give you a comparison of, look, this is why I can't trust the Quran, because I know not only has it plagiarized a lot of the prior material, but the claims that it makes on how inspiration works just falls flat on its face when you then do this type of investigation.
Yeah, and I think people, when hearing that, might be wondering, well, why can't you use the same sort of explanation that you use with the Bible? Like when we want to, like, appealing to ancient Near Eastern stuff in the cultural context and everything. And the answer would be that in Islamic theology, God is not accommodating people in the composition of Scripture. It's not a product of God and man. It's not confluent. It's just a product of God dictating to man, or not God, but God sent an angel to dictate to man. So it wouldn't be an accommodation, and you wouldn't be able to appeal to the same sort of explanation.
Yeah.
Interesting one.
Because in Islam, Allah has an eternal pen that for eternity writes perfectly what Allah thinks is universally true. And if that's the case, then okay. Oops, there was no such thing as the fire of the Chaldeans, and we know linguistically that's a mistranslation. And
right.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like somebody wants to get in Kelsier's Cannabis Reviews, but they messaged the Great Debate Community page. I have to message my personal page, not the Great Debate Community, because I'm like on Google Hangout. I'm just logged in as Richard Bushy myself.
Yeah, you might. Yeah, I might want to try that. Kels here is a good guy. He's not like a troll.
Okay. Is he on? Is he? He's not in the master list, is he?
No, but he is in the community, and I've had him on my shows a few times. He's pretty cool.
Steve, can I add Kelsier to the master list group?
Hunter, I'm loving your haircut. It's beautiful.
He participated like what 3 or 4 times in my things before, so I know
Okay.
he's okay.
Who is this guy, Barney? Does anyone know Barney?
Yes, I do.
No, Barney the dinosaur. That
Barney the dinosaur.
No,
Right. Yeah.
I just talked
You've
to
seen
Barney.
the show.
I talked to Barney the other day. I think with Ouchie. Was that with you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's cool.
Yeah. Did he tell you how much he loves you? Oh wait, I'm thinking of the
I'm
wrong Barney.
not cool. I'm hot,
Oh,
sizzling.
sorry. Let me get my back.
to hear Barney use those words, that's just ridiculous.
We need him around because he's the best person to do the outro for all these hangouts.
All right, that's the only reason why I joined. I saw the call.
Yeah, he had to be there for the outro.
Yeah. So are we done here?
Nope. Not yet. You have a ways to go.
Oh yeah, Barney. I think I've been in with you before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Barney.
You've been with me plenty of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of kids know Barney. I'm kidding.
Oh wow.
Wrong Barney. Sorry, that name.
Okay, Barney. So are you here to talk nonsense with us? Because that's what this hangout is about.
That's about the only thing I'm good for.
Well, I think I kind of think all,
Hey,
I kind of think all
I'm
the
here.
debate community debates should be called talking nonsense.
yeah, oh, yes, obviously. What else could it be? I'm so amazed by all these people trying to claim that there's some sort of rhetoric and deep philosophy and rules and logic to all of this.
Here's the thing: you got the intellectuals here, then you have the shit talkers. A lot of them are shit talkers.
And
Which
then you
includes
have
me.
then you have some who are a cross between both.
Yeah, and you have pragmatical shit talkers and
Actually,
That's-
I invited someone to come on recently to talk about, I don't know, something. And what they said was, I don't think I'm very well equipped to debate that topic. And I was like, no, nobody in the great debate community is well equipped to debate anything. They're just people coming in, spouting their opinion off.
Okay, that's a good one.
yeah, there was a girl that came in on the hangout the other day. What was it? What was the topic? Damn it. Something like, "Oh, I'm not ready for proper debate and everything, but here are the," and made an elaborate logical structure and asked deep inside enticing questions and was basically booted out by nobody engaging her.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I don't know.
Wait, when was this?
You definitely don't need to be prepared to come into. I mean, depending on like what the topic is and who you're talking to, you usually don't need to be prepared to come into one of these. Like, I've literally never prepared anything for a GDC hangout because it's pointless. Actually, I had one friend who came into a great debate community. It was the abortion debate that. Oh, look at that! It's Apologia. It was actually the abortion debate that we had, and this friend of mine came in, and he had like this whole presentation prepared, and he had all these notes, and he was angry afterwards that he couldn't get through everything. And I tried telling him, like, don't prepare because it's pointless.
No, but
Only prepare. It's like a formal thing.
Oh man. Okay, Steve, that was such an easy one. Like as I was saying it, I knew that someone would say that. Steve said in the live chat, "We can tell you never prepare, Richard." Yeah, that was an easy shot. I don't give you any credit for that because that was easy.
no, it would be
All
cool
I have
to
to say in Richard's defense is, to be honest, he doesn't need to prepare. He just so eloquently, like, introduces things and.
Amen.
It would be cool
Well-
to occasionally have things where you actually need to prepare and where you know the topic like
mean,
2 weeks
yeah,
in
if-
advance. But once a month is fine.
Yeah, I mean,
By the way, just quickly, since Apology just come in, Paul, I saw your Ken Ham video when you got to meet him. That put such a grin on my face because you were like, your work changed my life, and Ken Ham has no idea.
Well,
So
I don't know.
did you tell him at all, like, who you actually are, or you just left it
Well, I just left. I mean, I don't know if you saw it. Those security guards were getting. Every time I took a step forward, those security guards took a step forward. Like they were on to me.
Wow. They
So-
know who you
No, but what if you were just thinking that and that wasn't the case? And
Well, it's quite possible.
just paranoid.
I was there with a friend who was not. She was not there to. She's not in the cause. Like I was. If I had been by myself, I might have been a little more confrontational. But this seemed to me to be a good opener that I could disarm them with because it was true. His book changed my life. So the fact that he made me an atheist, you know, if they'd have let me go on for longer, that would have been fine. There was a big long, what you couldn't see, there was a long line of people after me too. And most people didn't say anything to them. They just got their picture taken and walked away. So I was pleased with what I got. I seriously think, and I would love anyone's feedback, it seems to be 50-50. I think Georgia knew who I was, like Georgia Purdom. I think once I said ham and egg news, her whole body language just changed.
yeah, because who would bring that up, right? And I mean, she may have even recognized your voice.
She may have, and I mean, I look enough in like my cartoon character that like if someone's bringing it up, you'd have to clue in, I think. So anyway,
Right.
it was fun. It was fun to anyway to meet
But
them and to get
my
that.
goodness,
did you learn how they
Go ahead.
Is that what they do? Like when they do the news thing, they actually have a crowd listening on that, or is that just a one-off
No, so they started
event
that.
that they had?
They started that on July 28th was their first show doing it live in front of an audience. So they've only been doing it for about a month. So they clearly still had kinks to work out. Like this was not their usual system. Although it makes total sense having been there. There's so little to do that the fact that they were recording some news show in a building, you know, inaccessible. This is at least just something to put on the screens and have the crowd do. And I think Ken feeds off the typical affirmation. It felt a little bit like a Pentecostal service with all the amens and the nodding of the heads and everything. Having someone, I'm not sure in the month they've been doing it, I'm not sure they've had someone who disagrees with them in the audience. So
You know, after seeing it like that, I'm starting to wonder. Now, I could be completely wrong, but the more I see young earth creationist organizations and I think the biggest one would be Ken Ham's ministry. The more material that they present, the more vocal they become, and the more with social networks and the stuff that they do and so on, and now in this case having people sit in on this stuff. Would you label that ministry as a cult, like no different to say like a Jehovah's Witness organization,
Ooh,
where it's
tough
a cult mentality?
well, I would say it is. First, I'll say like I think what Kent Hovind is running is a cult. Like he's literally got his compound and he's got he's got that level of thing going on. What Ken Ham has, and what I've been calling him out on now recently, what I've really noticed is he's far less calling out atheists and secularists. He is calling out other denominations that don't agree with what he's got because he's selling material. Like what I've also now come to learn in the last couple of months, they're making most of their money off of, so they sell, for example, VBS packaged sets, right? The churches come in, here's your VBS material, and now they have a competition, a competing thing for Alpha. Like they have a whole course that isn't Alpha, but is almost exactly like it. They have their new Answers curriculum thing, which is basically homeschool curriculum. Like they are putting this giant wedge between, we have the only correct interpretation.
Wouldn't that fit into the category of cult, even though they have the finances and the...
Well, yeah. So that way I would say yes. Like they are very much selling that there is one interpretation of the Bible that is correct, and that they are the only ones that have it. So for example, the Speaker in the Morning, which I'll have whole videos on the rest of my Creation Museum experience. the speaker in the morning, his whole message, and it was framed like a message, like a sermon, was that your pastor is likely wrong in his interpretation on this stuff, and you need to go back and correct your pastor. Like, it was very much go back and fight with your leadership. And to convince them to buy stuff.
Like crud. That is insane.
Yeah, I definitely don't like that, and I don't like their rhetoric against theistic evolution and old Earth creation, but I don't know that I would go as far as to say that that makes them cultish, right? Because, I mean, every denomination would say that their interpretation is correct. And they would also say, like I've heard Ken Ham say several times, that you're still a real Christian even if you accept theistic evolution.
Yeah, I think it might be more.
Wait, was it Ken Ham or Ken Hovind?
Oh, Ken Ham, not Hovind.
Yeah.
I was just going to
say,
I
will go
think
as far as to say I'm a different god or something.
I think maybe it's more a sign that maybe they're dying out and they need more people, right?
Yeah, I actually heard that. I think all that said that younger creationism is actually dying. Or did I heard that from someone?
So, I mean, it depends on who you look at. So Ken Ham, I mean, he really pushes this book called Already Gone. I don't know if you've seen that one, but they did a big commission study, and they quoted over and over that 2/3 of people who grew up in what they would consider an evangelical Christian church, fundamentalists holding to the young earth movement, they say 2/3 of those people leave by the time they're 19. And so the only way to, and they would count like someone going to theistic evolution as lost, right? Wow,
okay, that's very
insulting. Paul, I've heard that kind of statistic before. I don't know how much I would.
No, I don't. Like, it's his research book, and he's using it to sell books. So I don't necessarily put stock into it.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
He commissioned the study. So anytime someone commissions a study, you have to say, why did they do that? But so by his reckoning, 2/3 of the people are being lost. Now, the other study I recently pointed out was, of course, there's some Gallup polls recently saying that it's that young Earth creationism is on the decline in the States, and it went from, someone should look this up, but I want to say that it's down to 39 from the last time. It was 44 last time they did a study, something like that.
Yeah, I did hear that too.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, I may have heard it in what Hugh Ross does. He does what's called a paradox class every Sunday at his own church, and for like an hour. And I think it was the last one, this Sunday, where he was asked that question, and he said young Earth creationism is dying. So,
hey, Paul G, I have to say, I really like your video, Ken Ham Made Me an Atheist. I mean, obviously I don't rejoice that you're an atheist, but I appreciate that you point out that it was this sort of thinking that led you to that. So I wanted to ask you, and you might have heard me ask other people in the GDC this question, do you think when you first became a Christian, if you were exposed to, say, theistic evolution, like General Han Solo, if you were exposed to General Han Solo's material when you first became a Christian, do you think you would have left the faith? So
first I'll say, if exposed to his material is a different question than he exposed to him, because he brings, a whole extra layer of sexiness / confusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, right? All right. All right.
No, so it's a good question, because the people I grew up with, who at the time I considered them to be bad Christians. The people I considered to be bad liberal Christians, and probably in my head they were going to hell because they interpreted things too loosely. I think that I probably still would be some sort of level of a churchgoer who believed, yes. Because I was raised to and went to Bible school and all that kind of stuff, because I was, basically I went along with the line that, to the original topic of your video here, that the Bible is inerrant, like literally not one jot or tittle Come on, puppy. Shush. Not one jot or tittle is wrong. That made it very much an easy shatter type position. Like when you one chink in the armor means I had to reevaluate all of it, right? And I wouldn't have gone hunting probably. Like I hope I would have come to the same conclusion that I come to now because I think I'm correct. But I wouldn't have had the impetus to go and dig into it more than I did. And I have to deal with this dog for a second.
Okay.
At least she's not mating.
Right.
Okay, so can I ask just the weirdest question? I'm sorry. It's just something that's been on my mind for months.
Yeah, do it.
I've been thinking about Christmas, and this is just, I think that Christmas had some effect on skepticism rising in the country, because the more we question the idea of Santa when we're young, it seems to lead to questioning other things later in life. Does anyone else see any kind of connection to that? Or
I would just address that to say that
No.
my mother was so careful to never let me or my sister believe in Santa, because she didn't want to ever be the one who was like telling them fairy tales on one hand and then causing us to doubt when we learned. Like, so my mother was as careful about that as any human in existence, and I still became an atheist. So probably, I don't know, that has too much effect.
Yes, I actually spoke with my partner on exactly that.
Your partner?
The hypothetical. Yeah, I have a lovely girl. That's true.
Okay.
A beautiful female companion. And
Okay,
in the context of what should happen after marriage, having children and stuff like that, well into the future. I was humbled by her. So she's a brilliant biochemist. She does like pharmaceutical stuff, and so she has a scientific method in mind. So she encompasses critical thinking and so on. And she's a Greek Orthodox Christian. But I had a kind of like a knee-jerk reaction against the whole Santa thing, towards the children. And she gave a very humbled response to that made me rethink my position on that. So she said, "Hang on a second, but there's a certain innocent fun behind the whole Santa story and having Santa visit you at night, that sort of thing." And I was thinking to myself, well, yeah, okay, it is a mythical tale. Like, I could dress up as Santa, if my children were like 1 or 2 years of age. And yeah, I guess they would probably believe that there's a Santa. But then at the same time, am I actually harming them psychologically about an actual existing Santa? If they then come to learn that it wasn't true, unless I somehow mash that together with, hey, it's me after all, but I'm just playing this role or something.
well, otherwise, if that's the case, all
Robert,
pranks are off limits.
Yeah. Robert, I think this would be a better parallel if children believed in God for the same reason that they believe in Santa. Like, if you believe in Santa, it's because your parents told you about it. But if you believe in God, you probably have your own reasons for it. And if you go into adulthood continuing to believe in God, and your reason for believing in God is that your parents told you, then you're probably going to leave the faith, which is
yes.
what we usually. Yeah. So, but if you have your own reasons, then you'll continue believing. So I think that would be where the parallel ends, where if you have your own reasons as opposed to your parents just telling you and you believing what your parents say.
Couldn't a child not make up his own reasons for still believing in Santa, hypothetically? I know there's a weird...
They could do that, but they could do that. And
that's what happens the whole God thing. The reason why I still accept God is, sure, my parents told me that he's true and everything, but then you start coming up with your own reasons to reinforce it. So it's a combination.
And that's what we actually discussed. We then went beyond that and said, what about the whole religion thing? And she's so she didn't voice opinion first. So I was the first to say that I will not at all introduce Jesus to my children. We may have a tradition of going to church, or we may have a tradition of, say, giving grace before having a meal, or in this case, obviously, his name would be brought up, from my mouth, if we were discussing something. But I wouldn't indoctrinate or bring up my child with a so-called Jesus focus.
Why not?
I would rather want to learn by.
Don't you want to teach your children what is true?
Yeah, that's the best thing to do.
No,
that's pretty counterproductive.
So I would be. So, for example, if I was to teach, say, and I know this is most likely going to happen. So, when my children go through schooling, I can obviously be their own professional teacher and say mathematics and physics and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, obviously I'm educating them in that, and in that context, I'll be educating them in the Bible, but not just the Bible. In some contexts, if the school happens to be multicultural, which now obviously it will be, I could be educating them in other religious contexts for the sole purpose of educating them in historical discourse and how other people think and so on. But when it comes to more personal decision making, if my child were to ask me, well, why do you believe in Jesus? Then I will give my personal opinion and my personal convictions, which then I will preface to the child, either to my son or daughter. I'll say, well, that now notice how I've critically analyzed this, but I want you to do the same. I don't want you, just because I'm your father, I don't want you to just follow blindly what I believe.
Right.
Even though I've laid out an argument.
It's so fascinating to hear that, because I'm kind of trying to do the same thing from an atheist standpoint of not explaining to my children that God doesn't exist, but exposing them to all the religion and pointing out what the good parts are and what the valuable messages are as far as I can see them, and pointing out that people have different beliefs, but trying to not influence them in telling them, oh, it's stupid to believe, or like I still see it as counterproductive though. Why? Because, okay, maybe not so much for you, but for general, if that is the truth, that God exists in that, would it not be best to tell your kids that is the truth, so they have a way better chance of actually going down that path in the first place?
Not at all, because I value critical thinking, and I think good critical thinking stems from a non-indoctrinational approach. So,
actually, Robert,
problem is that there's
I will say this. I could be in the minority. In fact, maybe Christians in this panel will disagree, and I don't mind the disagreement. But I despise Christian parents who push religion on their children at a very young age. That's one thing I don't like to see.
Yeah. Well, I do. I despise it too, but it still makes sense.
Hold on.
It makes sense why they do it.
No,
it
sucks.
I think I'm getting what General is saying.
Wait. Let me just put it this way. To be very blunt, when Lawrence and this could be a really controversial coming from because I'm a Christian. When Lawrence Krauss said it's child abuse, I'm actually bordering on agreeing with him on that.
Okay, Robert, I keep trying to defend you, but everything you say is more and more.
That's just insanity. I'm sorry,
but I'm not borderline going to say it. I believe that indoctrination of children, especially you say, okay, you have to read the Bible, that even if it's a kid's Bible, I'm going to full on say that is child abuse.
But what about like study of biology or any other sort of field of knowledge?
Yeah. So Robert, if you hold on, Robert, if you accept that theology is a field of knowledge, which as a Christian you do, it's the study of God, why wouldn't you treat it like any other field of knowledge?
Yeah, but that's what I prefaced it in the context of education, where I go, look, here are the scientific fields of knowledge that you will obviously be brought up into to progress in life. And now I'm not going to tell I'll give you a simple example. I'm not going to tell my son about, say, F equals ma, the second law of motion in Newtonian mechanics. I'm not going to be like, okay, F equals ma. You either believe that or not. No, I'm not going to approach it like that. I'm going to say, look, F equals ma. Now, here's why the equation is derived that way.
Yeah, but okay.
And here's some actual applications of that in real life.
Yeah,
and now you make up your mind on it.
At a simplistic level, like if you're teaching a child something, you can't go too far. Like for example, if you're teaching history, how much data could you give? Say,
there's levels of data to be approached. I agree. It's not like I'm going to dump my Google Drive on my 10-year-old.
Oh man!
But so there's a variability there, and I guess it comes down to, Dad, I have a question, and I'll be like, here's my answer, and it'll be a lifelong learning experience, and then I know the time will come when my children, if I do have children, I will leave behind a legacy of material that I've collected that they can continue to look into and make up their minds on.
Mm-hmm. Robert,
I would say that I wouldn't want to tell my children, this is the truth and you're not allowed to question it.
Yeah.
That's definitely not where I would want to go with it. But I would want to point my children in the right direction and say, because this is something a lot of people don't think about. Some kids just won't be interested in, the kind of intellectualism we kind of engage in. Some people might be interested in art or some other kind of field, and we might just want to say, well, this is what I believe is the truth. This is why, and here's some resources you can look at if you're interested in it.
Yeah.
That's
okay, Robert.
Robert, some people think hard facts.
Hold on, Robert. I want to ask you a follow-up question. I think this would be a distinction between teaching your kids how to think rather than what to think. But I wonder if there isn't kind of an overlap there, because if you're teaching them how to think, then there's a sense in which you're also teaching them what to think. Because if you want them to learn critical thinking skills, then you're telling them that critical thinking skills are valuable, and you're also making ontological claims about the universe, like that there are true propositions out there that can be known. So you're making like all of these philosophical assumptions that you are relaying to your children, and I wonder if that wouldn't be similar to teaching them theology.
No, I don't deny that. I don't, and I don't think any other parent in any other culture could avoid something like that. Mm-hmm. So I know that a Hindu family the child will inevitably be involved in a form of Hinduistic epistemology.
Yeah.
Same with Muslims. And so when atheists say, whatever religion you're brought up in, or whatever family context you're brought up in, that's what you will ultimately reflect, then I don't deny that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was born in India. I was born to a European family in India. So naturally, even within India, though the schools would promote Hinduism, I would still attend church, but then I make the claim that I was an atheist until 21. But the point is I would still attend church because the family was European, and there you go. But I think at the same time, I would like to be thankful to the upbringing I did have, and that is even though my family are very good Christians, like morally and they're very thoughtful Christians, they never forced it onto me. That's what I'm trying to drive at. They just, it was just, the whole cultural heritage of that westernized way of thinking, I appreciate, and all all the little mannerisms that come out of that, like how you treat, say, a female guest. You stand before she sits down. Little things like that. It's instilled into me. But then ultimately, these ultimate questions of meaning of life, in this case, religion and so on, it was literally my own journey. Even though there was a slight guidance there from the family, but it was ultimately my own choosing to do that sort of thing. So I want to try and model that towards any children I may have. Because I want to, go ahead.
Earlier,
if I were a Christian parent, I'd probably just want to save my kids from hell. So this is the problem here, is that you have critical thinking that might get in the way of actually getting into the proper end goal.
But you see, that whole hell thing just comes from an inferiority complex, which, in my opinion, I think God is bigger than that.
Hold on, Thaddeus. So,
but you're just denying what's going to happen in the end, anyhow, if they don't accept.
No. Thaddeus, hold on. I think what General is saying is that if you, and it kind of draws us back to what I was saying at the beginning. If you indoctrinate your kids and just force Christianity on them, then you are giving them they are basing their beliefs on a story that you told them. They're not coming up with their own internal reasons. So that won't be any good for getting them, for saving them from hell, So
they do come up with their own internal reasons. A lot of times people do end up adding on what they've been told. It happens. That's part of your brain. But that's how I was raised. I was raised very, I guess, I don't want to say super fundamentalist, but fundamentalist enough.
Yeah, okay.
And then I came up with my own reasons for believing in God. Despite the ones that
so I think what Robert might say is that if you also ingrain critical thinking skills in them, and if Robert believes that Christianity is the truth and that truth can be known by way of critical thinking, then your children, if you've raised them right, will become Christians, and they will be more likely to be strong in their faith and avoid the consequences of hell. So
there's so many critical thinkers in that are more atheistic minded. Because the more you start thinking, the more you start to think that all this stuff in the Bible seems very uncredible and all that. Let's not pretend that half these atheists.
But you see, that's my point. So say if my child, like, to give an extreme example, say my child becomes either an atheist or remains an atheist, or becomes, in a way, God forbid, a Muslim. But I have to allow for, that possibility. At the end of the day, I will respect his decision. He or she is a unique human being with a certain conscience.
Every time I hear you talk, I gain more and more respect for you.
Hey guys, I think Paul wants to say something. He keeps unmuting.
I do. Well, I just wanted to go back to the question that you asked me, and I was going to say, Thaddeus, were you listening to the answer that I gave to Richard in terms of, if I had been raised to think about it critically as opposed to accept it based on authority, which is basically my whole church upbringing was all just to respect authority. It's all authority based. Everything's just, the pastor says, so you do it.
Right.
The question had been, if I had been raised to be a more critical thinker and to have, been examining it all my life within that context, would I have been more or less likely to be an atheist today? I would be less likely to be an atheist today. And if you brought my sister in here, who is incredibly a fundamentalist Christian, you guys would laugh at her for the reasons she has for being a Christian. She has not examined this at all.
But is she still a Christian?
She absolutely is, but for very bad reasons. No,
exactly. That doesn't matter what the reasons are. She's still a Christian, so therefore it's still effective.
Thaddeus.
We're emotional creatures. We're not logical creatures. I keep having to point this out.
No, I agree with you. But, the way I think about it is imagine you raise your kid in one way in which they just accept it based on authority, right? Or based on the fact that your parents taught you. And then in another way where you also give them the information. So like what I would do is I would give my kids the information that's necessary if they want to look.
Kicked? Sniped?
I think with
no. I
thought
I lost connection.
Yeah, I do. We just lost Ochiwawa.
Yeah, it's a phone glitch thing probably.
Yeah.
I think it's their mobile phones there. It cuts out.
So
but just quickly, Barney, you said something about the more you listen to me, you respect me.
Yeah, the more I listen to you, the more I respect you, seriously. I was raised a Catholic, and I really had a problem with being raised with a critical upbringing, with respect for science, and this one nugget of dogmatic, unquestionable knowledge that is God. And it's the Santa effect. I believed as far as I could have as a child, and when it came time for my confirmation and when somebody explained to me what confirmation was, I kind of had to honestly say, I cannot confirm. I have to critically think about God now. And it took me 20 years to go from full Catholic to full atheist, basically just on the basis of those two views are incompatible in one head. And I believe that what General is describing is possibly the only way to have a critically minded child grow up and not lose God.
Or maybe just teach them correct science.
I think that is what you're trying to say, is to do something, now tell me if I'm wrong, but to do something equivalent to what Matt Slick did with Rachel.
I don't know what he did with Rachel. Testimony. I don't know. I just know that Rachel is not a Christian anymore or whatever, but I don't keep up with all the drama.
Did you read her testimony on her upbringing, the type of upbringing she had, and what then led her to become an atheist?
On Pantheos, or whatever that website is.
Yeah.
I think I remember reading something where she like studied and stuff, and she'd be like quizzed on like all these Bible nerd terms and stuff.
Yeah.
I think I remember
like that type of. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I mean, she could have embellished it. I don't know. But if that was the case, that seems very unhealthy. It's a very unhealthy upbringing, in my opinion.
I think there's a middle position between Thaddeus and General, which is just to teach them that this is true, but also give them the information by which they can, look more into it if they want to.
Well,
I think that's fair. Provide reasons for it.
If you're going to teach them critical thinking, you can't tell them what is true. It's kind of like saying you can restrict free speech. You just can't do it, otherwise it's not free speech.
Yeah, okay. So the question seems to me is not. I mean, I would agree with General Han Solo, like Barney would, but I think teaching, you can teach just by leading through example. And that's often what we do with our children anyway. And they're going to rebel at some point in their teenage years. So I think not indoctrinating them too hard is probably a good idea. There's going to be an amount anyway, as you say, just because you lead by example, right? If you're a good person and you want your children to be good, well, you do good things. So I think the other point really, just to get to it, Thaddeus, quickly, is that is Thaddeus wrong, though? Is it wrong that even with heavy indoctrination, as long as they stay a Christian, is that a wrong thing?
I think so. I wouldn't say that it was a wrong thing, but I would say that it's not ideal for constructing a society in which Christians are perceived as rational people and where Christianity is perceived as a rational option. Because when you are doing that, then kind of like what Paul said, if he brought his sister in here, she would give bad reasons for being a Christian, and that would be the kind of representation that we would have, because the Christian wouldn't be critical thinkers.
The problem is if you're
right.
raised
at the macro, one second, at the macro scale of society, what Richard said there was practically what thoughtful Christians don't want other people to think of that Christianity is, and that's a good point. I'm more concerned about the micro scale, and that is the actual individual itself. So the individual is a human being that has every much of human rights that each one of us has, and in no way am I going to imprison, in this case, my own children, with just my way of thinking. I think that's a very unhealthy thing to do, to just imprison their mind that this is what I think, what reality is.
You're also acting like they won't ever have like their own personality or thing either. Like no one's personality just gets exactly copied.
No. Well, it's because I know they have their own personality that I want their own personality to flourish, and their own thinking, their own brains to flourish. Right. They're their own persons.
Okay,
there's no point for them astray.
So let me maybe I can point out. Maybe
what about the consequences for their soul?
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. That's the whole end game thing. It doesn't really matter how much it sucks, as long as you get to the end point. It's about being effective. This isn't about feeling.
No.
Hang on, calm down, hang on. That is, they've already said that it's not wrong. It's just not ideal. Okay, so there's a subtle difference between the two.
What you just argued was way too extreme. Can we dial it back just a little bit? Because you just said it doesn't matter how much they suffer, essentially.
Yeah, because in the end, it is going to stare.
Well, guess what? I'm on the extreme side of that suffering. My dad full on tortured me to get it in my head.
Yeah. So that is, I think what you would be doing would be kind of consequentialism, wouldn't it? Like the ends justify the means.
Well, yeah. I mean, if we're just looking at this effectively, if we want to be as logical as possible, if you want to pretend to be logical beings here, if you want to avoid that, it's the ultimate bad state. Do whatever you can to avoid that ultimate bad state.
No. Look, as Christians, our objective isn't to just go out and target people and just put things in their head, and especially with our own children, like just kind of drowning them in our views. It's to cultivate people who are in a position to be more to be faithful throughout their lives and intelligent and grow more in their faith and learn more and be more like Christ ultimately.
And that's another thing. Like why is there such a big? I understand. Like for some, again, it's good because you can have conversations on here, like on the internet. But in practical uses, why do you have to be an intelligent Christian? It doesn't matter.
Of course, it's not just being an intelligent Christian, though. It's about being an intelligent person and a good person and a person who is faithful and who legitimately wants to serve Christ, not just somebody who has been indoctrinated into.
Okay, well, you let me know how many atheists that you convert on here.
Which ironically is, when you look at New Testament teaching as a whole, that embodiment of the whole human being, with what Richard just said, is exactly the theology.
Exactly, yeah.
That drives me to think like that as a father.
So Thaddeus, are you allowed, like in your worldview, in this philosophy, are you allowed to lie to someone to win them to Christ? Like, is that okay with you?
Well, it'd probably technically be a sin because there's lying. And
but again, I know, but you think but is that, even though it's a sin, it's one of the smaller ones. It's Ninth Commandment stuff. So, are you allowed to do that? So for example, my whole channel is dedicated to Eric Hovind and Ken Ham, who I feel are deliberately lying, and they're doing it to win souls. So go ahead.
If I can reply to that, a lot of the times, now, I know we look on here, and when you look to the big people, it's really easy to see, oh, yes, they're lying. Okay, I'm not a young earth creation. I'm not even a Christian, for crying out loud. But Ethan, talking in this kind of context, though, a lot of the times, how I was raised, as raised creationists, my parents weren't purposely lying about creationism to me. That's what they honestly believed was the truth. Yes, they were mistaken. Yes, the evolution is a thing, but they just don't know it. But they weren't purposely trying to lie to me. It just ends up by doing their best to teach me what is true, they ended up telling me a lie. But it's not the same as purposely putting a lie in their head.
That's not what it means.
Which is why I was asking the question.
That's not what it means. Hold on. That is not what he means. He means that on his channel, he will show how Eric Hovind will misrepresent a fact to win converts over. And that would be a purposeful lie.
Right, and I think that's wrong. Whatever.
Okay,
yeah, but you're only going the fact that all he has to do is call up God and apologize, and everything's forgiven.
Well, no, that's stupid. But wouldn't okay? Are we still here? No, that is not.
I'm still here.
You just
no. I meant it dropped.
Yeah, there is a middle ground.
Okay.
I just want to quickly say, since you brought up Eric, I think that's a brilliant point. So, I would hate to be in Eric's position as a father. That's where I'm coming from, because I don't know if Eric realizes this or not. I personally, I guess I'm thankful to see Eric as an example of someone I would not be, and that is bring up my children with pseudo facts for the sake of keeping that child of mine in the faith, and you know, giving false information. Like
right.
I can't ever imagine myself teaching my child things that actually are not that have not gone through peer review and have not gone through academia, and it's just, you know, pulled out of my ass, so to speak. Like I wouldn't be in my right mind to even do something like that. Like, okay, sure enough, maybe 20 years from now, say a certain physics concept may be like upgraded substantially, and in the meantime, I may have thought the natural thing. Fine, and the same thing can be applied to the Bible. But at least it was through the vetting process of high intense scholarship, you know, distilled down to a simple form, rather than someone like Eric who just totally lies to people in the young earth context.
Right. If you know it's a lie, then yeah, it's bad. But the thing is, half these people don't know it's a lie.
Hey guys, so I wonder if we can. I want to ask Paulogia this. Paulogia, do you think that these are just straight up lies? Do you think you might just be spicing it up with a little bit of rhetoric there by actually calling it lies, or do you think he legitimately knows that what he's saying is false?
In the context of Eric?
Yeah.
There are things where I know he actually will say what the right answer is, like in the same show. Now he doesn't accept it for whatever reason. So, but I have to call some of them lies because he knows what the correction is. So, for example, he deliberately uses fossilization as a general term when he knows. Sometimes he'll correct himself and accidentally say permineralization when that's really what he means. But he will use fossilization to give it a broader context to make things sound more impressive to a general audience. So in those cases, I know he's deliberately using the wrong word.
Yeah, maybe he's just like separating it in his head, like this is this and this is this, you know, and he's trying to communicate in that way, even though he doesn't think he's deliberately lying.
Right. So, I mean, that's a question I get all the time. Do I know that they're deliberately lying? Sometimes I feel like I catch some of them deliberately lying. Mm-hmm. But I do think that in general they believe what the message is. Like, I don't think that, like, I think they believe, I think they honestly in their heart believe that the earth is 6,000 years old, you know, for example. Like, I don't think they're being that disingenuous, if that makes sense. Sorry, yeah. He's being noisy. But so I don't know if that answers your question. I think he's very, very willing to be pliable with the way truth goes. Like, he'll, you know, admit after the fact, okay, I was being hyperbolic on this or whatever. Like, he will sometimes backtrack his statements, but in a much, he makes the broad thing in front of the entire audience, and then later on he'll backtrack the statement. But then he'll make the same statement the next time he gives the presentation.
Okay.
You know, as Steve McRae found with his dad, right? So he would correct a slide, but then Kent goes ahead and uses the slide again next time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems pretty disingenuous.
Okay, so here's kind of a follow-up question. And I've asked Steve McRae a similar question about his focusing on certain people in the GDC like G-Man or Kent Hovind. Like, for example, Kent Hovind is, like, in the Christian community, like people I know, he's thoroughly discredited. Nobody takes him seriously. And wouldn't it be kind of the same with, like, Eric Hovind? Like, why even bother going after Eric Hovind? Because it's such like a low-hanging fruit. You know, why not choose legitimate scholars who
you're talking to me?
Yeah.
So in case this is unclear, the reason I have my channel is because my children are young Earth creationists.
Your children?
I have 3 kids, 14, 15, and 18. They are all young Earth creationists. And they will not, after I was outed as an atheist, they will not talk to me about the subject of religion. They stay at my house every second week, but they will literally not, like, this is a topic they're just not comfortable talking about. I think you also know that I had a cancer scare, and that at one point I had like 4 weeks to live. So it was literally like,
I didn't actually know that.
Okay, so this is all weird back. So, but you're asking why I focus on those guys.
Yeah.
My entire channel is my legacy in case I'm not around for my kids. So my kids believe Eric Hovind and Kent, like they believe all that stuff. So my channel is not to everyone, even though, you know, I'm glad that other people get stuff out of it. Ham and Egg News is a weird thing that I do for my own fun. But my green labeled science videos are all for them. They know that it exists. They haven't watched it really. They know it exists. When they're ready, they will.
Okay,
so that's my answer.
Now, honestly, I feel bad for challenging you about that.
But that's a great question. But it's literally because, and also like my sister who I mentioned, my parents, everyone I know and grew up with, I know it's ridiculous to everyone in this community, but the people I grew up with believe that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the Canadian equivalent of a red state, right? Like that's all just accepted. So, and I mentioned this before, like if they become theistic evolutionists, awesome. Like I am not trying to deconvert them out of Christianity, but I wish that I could go back and re-raise them to be the critical thinkers. So that's partially why I was getting a little bit hot about Thaddeus as well, was that like, if I could do anything over again, I would go back in time and raise my kids to be critical thinkers.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. I learned like a few, not even weeks, maybe weeks ago or so, that intellect is not everything. Sometimes you have a little more of a harsh or brash solution to get you to the end goal. It really isn't.
Like we could impose Sharia law on people and just force them to believe whatever we want them to believe. Right.
Well, no, because that goes against the Bible.
Yeah,
Sharia law is like
the biblical version of Sharia law then.
It's like it's not even equivalent.
Okay, never mind.
There's nothing in the Bible against using
like that.
There's nothing in the Bible against using emotional tactics to convince people. Like, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean like. Some people just are convinced more by connecting emotionally to things.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the way that you phrase that sounded like you're emotionally manipulating people, but I think what you mean is something like fostering friendships or helping people or something like that, right?
Or if you think about
hopefully.
How can you argue it in any other way as other than emotional manipulating? If you're helping them to get them closer to Christ, to get them to believe, if you have an agenda in your actions, that's an emotional.
Yeah, Barney, that's a great question.
But we influence people all the time.
Yes, hold on. Let me answer this question. I think that the way that you do that is to not have that sort of objective when you're looking at people. I think Christians should be forming unconditional friendships with other people and unconditionally helping them, even if you have absolutely no hope that they would ever become a Christian. And you would be doing this not because you want them to convert. You'd be doing it because you care about them and to glorify Christ. And so if they respond to that by becoming Christians, then that's great, but that isn't your objective. So you're not emotionally manipulating them or trying to emotionally manipulating them. You're doing it because you care about them, and you're doing it unconditionally.
Yeah, I share that. I share that notion. Even though I'm an atheist, I believe that should be the primary goal of every person, to try to be a good person.
Yeah.
Whatever the consequences.
And I think that some people need that emotional connection. Like, some people want to feel something from religion more than just, some kind of intellectual thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because I think for some people, intellectualism will only get you so far. I said before, a lot of people are emotional creatures. So if you can connect with them on an emotional level, that might be a lot more effective for your average everyday populace.
I think that's true, like, pretty much for everyone.
Yeah, because you guys sound like Kirk Cameron with if you circumvent the intellect, then you can win the heart. It's like, well, this sounds awful.
I don't know what keeps happening to Thaddeus and Ochiwawa. They keep disappearing at the same time.
Although obviously,
they're having an affair.
I appreciate any time when Christians who think that I'm going to hell actually try to talk to me about this stuff. It's actually really offensive when the people you think I'm going to hell and you don't even want to talk to me about this. That's always like super offensive to me. Actually, it's even worse.
Well, people react differently. Like if I were to go up to somebody and start talking to them, like somebody that I don't even know, some people might get offended by that. Others would get offended if I do,
Yeah, I'm thinking friends.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I don't know. It's just there's this seems to be this disconnect between what's emotional manipulation and what's just what's the cold-hearted reality of what needs to be done in order for us to get to the end goal. And then if you're going to try to convert people, sometimes you do have to do things that are kind of that some people think are shady. But...
No.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's effective.
No, not necessarily. Okay,
yeah, but so is using cartoons to sell cigarettes.
There are certainly Christian organizations giving charity where they do not insist upon somebody having a prayer or a sermon before they give the charity. And that seems to me perfectly acceptable, right? Because that way charity is not linked, right, to the having to hear the word in inverted commas. So that's okay. Right. Obviously, in history, it's not been that way, right? And particularly the Catholics like to say, come in, listen to a sermon, and then you can get your food.
Right. And I'm saying sometimes the tactics work.
That's manipulative. But nonetheless, if it's up front, is that manipulative then? So the question is it manipulative? I think you answered well, which is just about everything. Any interaction is going to be manipulative.
Everything is manipulative.
On some level, right? The question is, do we think that level is more or less than what is socially acceptable by human standards anyway?
Right. Except we are pretty darn manipulative with each other, so.
Sure. We're social creatures, so that is going to be inevitable.
Right, exactly.
Right. But nonetheless, I think
let's use our skills as social creatures.
So if you attach some conditional to the aid that you're giving, then obviously that seems manipulative. And if you don't attach a conditional, then it seems non-conditional. It seems non-manipulative.
Right. If you're just doing it just out of the kindness of your heart.
Yeah. Or even because you have the idea that they may come to Jesus. That's fine as well.
Right.
It's just linking it with the aid that's the issue. Right. But again, I find a good compromise, right? If someone says, have a meal and stuff, and then afterwards, if you want to come back and have a chat, that's cool.
Yeah, honestly, I'm okay.
A good way of doing it.
I'm okay with that kind of thing because that's not shady. That's pretty upfront, and people are there because they want to be there.
Exactly. Which seems okay.
I'm just saying that sometimes that might be the only way that motivates some people, because who knows how many Christians don't even want anything to do with atheists and unbelievers. So it's like, hey, if that gets them out there, I guess it works.
Here's something related. At my church back home in New York, I'm not living there anymore, but they would always give free lunch after the service, and so they had like a big array of food and like real food, like meat and a bunch of stuff. And I would always tell them, "You guys really need to post 'We have free food' on the sign," because people would legitimately come for that.
The church that I went to in California had donuts between Sunday school and the service, and they did advertise that. That was on the sign, and yeah, it was very popular.
Yeah, I think people would come for that.
Yeah, but when I was talking about emotional things, it's not necessarily have to be, a tactic like manipulative. Like what I was thinking of, I watched this interview with this priest one time, and he said that what brought him to the church was actually going to Rome and looking at all of the art and connecting with that art and sort of falling in love with the beauty of Christianity in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that. Like that, and that would be a kind of a non-evidentialist way of looking at it, which I totally sympathize with that. I don't know if everyone else here would, but yeah.
Well, I do. I mean, that's really just marketing tactics, and I'm all for that. That's great. Well,
no, I don't think it's marketing tactics. Well, I think these are expressions of the faith, and they just have them posted in Rome. Like,
well, if you're looking at it from my perspective, it's marketing tactics.
It's another art is another way of expressing truth.
Yeah,
but in a way,
you're trying to say everything I draw is a marketing tactic.
Well, no, I just say I just feels like, Thaddeus, that you're saying that there's nothing off limits from winning a soul. That's just
I'm not saying that. No. Well, I'm not. Like, if I could clarify, it's not
Please
nothing
do.
is off limits. Okay. What's off limits is, in my opinion, if you are saying things that, for instance, you go back to the young Earth creation thing. Yes, it is kind of messed up if you are saying that young Earth creationism is true when you know deep down it isn't. Like, if you yourself accept evolution and everything, but you're still teaching young Earth anyways, just to try to win over a soul, no, that's wrong. You basically know better, and yet you're doing it this way here because that's the easier way to win. No, but if you are unaware, if you are unaware of what you are doing, okay, like let's say you think young Earth creationism is the truth, and I'm just using that as an easy example. There's so many different things that we could go on. If you think this is true and you think that this lines up the Bible correctly, and you teach your kids that, and then you make sure they're not getting too influenced by the evil evolution education system, because if that's actually what you believe, if you're sincere about that, that's not you trying to emotionally manipulate people by being disingenuous about your beliefs. No, that's what you actually believe. And if you actually believe that you are doing good, this is what God wants you to do, this is what He's put on your heart, and this is what you believe is sincere, then I think, yes, that is, that'd probably be the best course of action for what you know.
Yeah, okay. I think a good example would be, Paul, did you see that painting of Jesus by Akian? I think she's 22 now, but she drew at the age of 8. She drew the face of Jesus. I'm not familiar with that one, no. I put her testimony on my channel. It's on my channel. I'm still trying to get through 24 hours of Exodus, man. Well, this is a 10-minute video titled "Painting the Impossible."
General, what is that supposed to show?
Well, it's just her personal journey into certain visions she's had as a young girl. Like at the age of 8, she seemed to have been a genius painter, and the fascinating thing about her depiction of Jesus is that he's more unique and more natural in his look than any of the so-called traditional paintings of Jesus, because
why does he still look
the traditional paintings are very feminine looking compared to her painting.
Okay, so
why does he still look kind of white in that one?
You connected it first with visions, so you're saying that she has visions and that's somehow spiritually
she's claiming
inspired.
it's her claim.
Okay.
And,
yeah, that's cool.
And it is a subjective thing, and the reason why I promote that drawing of hers is, and it is a subjective thing on my part, is that for some reason I can actually relate to that face. I don't know why, but somehow I do. I've never been able to relate to any other Jesus photo or painting than her work. So that's why I just reposted it.
Art is subjective, obviously. Aesthetics are, arguably one of the.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I saw the post that you actually shared, General, and I don't know, Jesus still ends up looking pretty white. If he's Middle Eastern,
I know.
Darker skin.
I know. Yeah.
I hate that. It's so stupid.
But, at the same time, the whole white thing, maybe she drew him a bit too white, but at the same time, it's not like they were all black. They were pretty
Near
lightly. They were lightly tanned at the time in the first century. They weren't dark, that's for sure. They did have a tan, look.
Hey, I've got another question for Paul. Paul, would you say that the Bible teaches young Earth creation, and if so, is that something you would be willing to have a more focused GDC debate about?
I do believe that it teaches it. I highly respect Hugh Ross. I came upon both Biologos and Reasons to Believe after I was already deconverted. So at that point, I don't really hold the Bible to what I once did. So it's hard to do that. Yes, I might be willing to discuss that further. I do think it teaches younger creationism.
Wow, really?
I do, but I fully respect with the General's interpretation and what I would hear from Hugh Ross, all that kind of stuff, and especially like the first 3 days are from one perspective, and then you shift on day 4 to another perspective. I get all that. To me, it just feels really ad hoc. Like I think that's a modern addition to the text. In that way, I actually agree with Kent and Ken. I feel like these are things that aren't really there. I mean, they're very clever. I just think that the Bible is so pliable that you can just say whatever you want. So,
why not the allegorical interpretation?
Well, hold on. Yeah. I wonder if, as we're looking at the Bible from like our scientific context, like the way that we think about things, if we were going to write about the creation of the universe, the way that we would write it would be chronological account of how things happened, and it would make sense like that. But I wonder if we shift our thinking to the way that the people who wrote it thought, I wonder if it would be different. Like, do you understand what I mean?
I totally get that. And I guess for me, the God I believed in would have been able to write it. I feel like, General keeps challenging people. How could you write it so that both people can understand it? I feel like that's a trivial matter. I'm kind of with Aaron Raw on this. Like, I think that it would be very easy to write it in the way that they understood. Now, I don't claim that I understand the ancient Middle East mindset well enough that I could throw one down, but I do feel like the God that I used to believe in would have had a better way.
I agree. He could have done it a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
But what would be that better way? That's the question.
Well, this is what I don't.
Hey, fish. They after millions of years it became reptiles.
Yeah. So, okay. You've got some feedback.
I think it's Coach.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so I agree completely that if God wanted to write a chronological account of the creation of the universe, he could do that, but I don't think that was like if that's not his intention, if he's not concerned about writing a scientific account, then I wonder how that would affect our interpretation of Genesis.
So
right.
for me, I guess the answer to that is then God does not care that I'm currently an atheist.
What do you mean?
Because that is part of the reason that I am, is that the freaking plants are there before the sun is not there. Like, God to me.
Yeah, I think God would just want you to not view Genesis 1 like that. Right?
Well, but I can know
interpretation.
No. I think wait. I think you're losing Richard's original point. What Richard's original point was, which is what I told Ken Hovind some time back, and that is, would an ancient Israelite like, say, Moses, would he, if he was transported to our day, and Ken Ham visited him, right? Would Moses go, "Oh, I'm in complete agreement with everything you're doing here," or would he? If he was approached by Michael Heiser, and then he would say, "Oh, I'm in complete agreement with the ancient Near Eastern cosmology," which one would he agree to? And I think the answer is he agreed with Heiser, and he would completely be alienated with Ken Ham's perspective of Young creationism.
Oh, I understand that.
So the point is,
and I don't.
The point is, no ancient Israelite was a Young creationist. That's the point.
Right, but I guess the question is, could God have written this to be not so freaking ambiguous? And
yes.
I have to think yes.
It's because the ancient Near East is so ambiguous to us. That's why.
Yeah. So
you can't blame God for that.
Exactly.
I think it becomes ambiguous when you try to read it as a scientific treatise about the world. But if you read it as a theological narrative, it becomes less ambiguous. So if you're looking for science, then it doesn't make any sense, and you get young Earth creationism.
But you have to realize that also that that these stories inside the Bible, the people would have known about it because they come from other. In part, they're influenced by other mythologies that were around during that time. It would be like It would be like
don't forget it's. No, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. No, I was just wanting to say because originally in this discussion, just when it was just Richard and myself, we were basically advocating that Genesis and practically every book has a human author to it, and it's not like God is programming everyone's mind to think a certain way in order to write a certain way. No, it's just inspiration works like a sail, like what Peter says, and that is a certain epiphany will take place, and then the author will, include that thought down, and then that's the providential hand behind the text.
Well, I think we're all missing.
But then
I think we're all missing
Paul
here.
1 second. I go the extra step and say, okay, look. So there's the ancient Near Eastern context that completely is not at all young of creationism, and I go the concordance route and say, look, I find it fascinating that the same text can be seen as a natural chronology of the way we understand it. It's not an ad hoc approach either.
It's legitimate. It seems to beg the question, though.
See, the problem is that, yes, whatever, maybe the Near Eastern people could have understood it as this weird allegory or whatever. But the thing is, God wanted more converts after the Near Eastern culture died off or whatever, right? So when it comes to people in the present day, we're not going to understand it the same way. So maybe he could have written it in a way that's a little more universal. Like, I guess he doesn't have to. You're correct. I guess he did
like the Book of Mormon?
That's why we have priests today. So they
that's why we have people who we as Christians we could say God raises them up in the church to further research and investigate and explain these concepts that otherwise other people would not have the ability to do that. And so, for example, Michael Heiser would be a modern day equivalent of the scholarship, the great scholarship that happened back in the 19th and 20th century and further.
Okay, so there's a huge problem with that. You guys know that I'm from Croatia, right? And there was a war here recently, and the problem with having people having to interpret God's intention and the Word of God and the Bible leads to priests literally saying, "Oh, we are supporting accepted by God. We are the chosen nation of God. The mother of Christ is watching over our nation. Now pick up your guns and go kill.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Barney. As a Protestant, I believe in what's known as sola scriptura, which means that Scripture is the sole infallible rule of faith. So we're not saying that scholars should stand above us as some kind of figure that we have to be obedient to. They are people who provide insight into the text, and we could go to them for knowledge, but they are not somebody to whom we owe obedience or anything like that. They're just providing knowledge.
Yeah, but you are accepting things on faith as a requirement to be of faith.
No, not at all, because they lay out the arguments, and it's up to you to make up your mind on that. They in fact, they tell you that.
Exactly. It's not like a scholar says, here's the conclusion. It's not like a scholar says, here's my conclusion, believe it or not. The scholar says, here's my reasoning, and here's how I got to this conclusion. Now it's up to you to assess it.
Yeah, that's really not how it works in a war situation.
I mean,
there's no theological.
I agree with you, Barney.
Those are the phonies.
It's not how it works in like a political situation where like
that's gonna happen.
It's not how it works where like in a political situation where a priest will have some kind of power over people, but it is how it works in like a scholarly setting. Right,
but you have to realize.
And when I'm using the word priest, I'm using it with big fat quotation marks. You're right. The politicians, and it's the populists, and it's Trump, basically.
So Barney, I mean, I'm pretty much in agreement with everything pretty much every point that you're making.
I think you're a little bit you're being a little bit too positive about humanity here. Because I don't think most people have the ability to go through and figure out people's reasonings about scriptures and stuff like that. Just like most people don't go through quantum mechanics and try to figure out the reasoning for that. They just
who are you addressing?
Accept. I'm addressing both of you, really.
Okay.
They just accept on faith, because faith just is trust in credible sources. They trust the scientists, or they trust the theologians, or something along those lines.
But Oshiwawa, like again, the quantum mechanical thing, that's why we have peer review. I mean, it's not just one person. It's not even 2 or 3 people. It's an entire committee that then, once it's gone through a heavy vetting process and it's applied in application. So, for example, computers. The reason why computers work is because of those concepts that were written down on those theoretical concepts written down on paper, and then the average consumer, it's there for sale. It's not like the average consumer has to then go, you know what, I need to go through 3 years of bachelor's degree in computer circuitry to then make the decision if this computer works or not. It works, and so that's all the faith that they need. It's just a legitimate.
The computer's more hands-on, though. You can actually test it yourself and try it and prove that it works. Some of these more abstract concepts, things that we don't have too much of an everyday relationship with, like quantum mechanics or whatever, you do kind of just take it on the road.
I mean, we can strain the analogy and apply it to those pseudo medicine claims that this bottle will cure your cancer or something. Like then, now you can have a legitimate form of critical analysis on that. Like you can ask that person, has this actually been investigated? Like, well, what's the who has done this? What's the credentials? And if you just buy into that sort of marketing, well, I hate to say this, but you're an idiot. You just buy things hook, line, and sinker, and it's your fault for doing that.
Yeah, the only way you'd really know, though, is if you had direct experience yourself. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are such things as credible sources. Yes, there are things where it's like, you should probably trust these guys say, but you have to admit that it is kind of a faith thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and they do have credible sources.
I'm sorry, but it is.
They do have credible sources, theologians, philosophers, and so forth that have degrees in these things, and they do go through peer review. So, yeah.
Well, some of these things where they actually can show you what the original text or whatever is, those are a little better. They actually say, hey, look, the original Hebrew word meant this or whatever. See, look for yourself. But there are other people where I feel like they just kind of say, oh, I've done the research and it just says this, believe me. And those kind of people.
But then that's why in that context, a bibliography is important, because if I come across a Hebrew scholar says, like, say, rakia means, say, a metal, or something like, for example, and I'll stick with rakia. So rakia is an actual solid dome in Genesis 1, and I've seen Hebrew scholars argue for that. I then look for the bibliography as to the scholarship that's gone into that word. I then look at, say, another Hebrew scholar that says, no, rakia is speaking about the expanse, so a three-dimensional expanse of this thing we call the dome, but it doesn't mean it's rock hard. It just means expanse. Bibliography. And lo and behold, I find it fascinating that the more up-to-date and the more critical the scholarship, the more in line with, with that definition of rakia is than, say, the one that says it's a solid expanse. So apparently the one who said it's a solid expanse was an older dictionary based on fewer scholarship analysis on that word. And so why do you think we need to keep looking at the latest editions of say, lexicons, and, stay up to date with the literature. Don't just rely on what was written, say, back in the 1800s or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But you can understand how someone like me is unimpressed with a book that is so pliable that the latest scholarship can constantly be coming up with different, much like everyone's like, oh, the science is always changing, so you can't trust it. I'm unimpressed.
It's not different, though.
No, but
it's just becoming more narrow to a more accurate understanding of it.
Right. But I'm unimpressed with a book that is so pliable that someone who hates homosexuals and someone who's okay with homosexuals can come up with a list of verses that both support their positions, or forget something as like that, or even like faith and work. So like almost any two positions, I can find denominations that pull up interpretations of scripture that support their completely opposed positions.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. And
or is that actually the Bible's problem? It seems like that's more of an interpretation problem.
But if I'm supposed,
I don't think the Bible should be blamed for that. I think it's okay. Paul, for example, let's do the homosexual one. So
that's me.
I've told Christians my view on Leviticus 18 and the misuse of Leviticus 18.
Right, and I'm pretty much with you on your point here. Go ahead.
Right. Oh, so you're familiar with my argument of Leviticus 18 then?
Yes, and I actually tended to agree. When I believed all this stuff, I actually felt
Can you elaborate for the rest of us?
Yeah, go ahead, General. Go ahead.
Maybe, Paul, do you want to do it? Well, just to see.
I think interesting. Paul would be more brief than General. General will spend the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, but that's for sure.
See,
in a nutshell.
I was gonna say, I agree with your conclusion. I do not remember all the dots of how you got there.
But that's fine. You try your best if you want. I don't know.
I mean, you're essentially saying, no, I've lost it. Go ahead, because essentially your argument was that this was that it wasn't viewed as a sin, and you were talking about lesbians in there. Boy, I've lost it now. I've lost it.
Okay.
Is the reason why
you lost it, but you agree with it.
But did it not have something to do with that?
All I was going to say was that I don't feel like it's a sin any worse than like adultery. Like and that's where I felt like your point landed, was that it was the same level of sin, as sleeping with someone outside of marriage, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And that it's obviously post-cross. So from a Christian context, yes. But if we were to just narrow down to Leviticus 18, why it's called an abomination is because of the concept of what it means to eject your semen into another man, rather than into a woman. And the fact that there's no mention of lesbians in the passage highlights that ancient Near Eastern understanding. So this is where it gets ironic, because again, using your analogy about one school of thought says this, another school of thought says that, and yet curiously, the school of thought that uses Leviticus 18 against homosexuality hasn't actually thought through the details. And so therefore you can't like make them on equal playing field. The one who doesn't use Leviticus 18 like me in the homosexual context has gone the extra step and gone to the extra details of fleshing out what it's getting at. And therefore I believe I'm actually more coherent in my interpretation than, say, the Christians who do use a passage. So those who use a passage don't realize that lesbians are not mentioned. Nowhere in the Old Testament is this concept of lesbians that there shouldn't be women, sleeping with each other.
Okay.
Like even in Roman John, there's no mention of lesbians.
But General, you would agree with me that there are Christian scholars who have a different position.
One second, Kelsey, you need to. All right, go ahead.
Well, you would just agree that there are Christian scholars who disagree with you on this point, right? That there are...
No, but again, it is an audacious claim, but I believe their investigation into the text is so narrow and so limited. I mean, it is a audacious claim. I'm making the claim that, like,
right. I understand that we all
a 29-year-old
we all agree that they're
has
wrong.
read a lot compared,
but that they still hold to the opposite conclusion than you, even though they haven't done all their work, but they still are out there.
Okay. If they did their work, if they actually looked at the same material I did, which is more than what they have, I believe a lot of them will then realize the logic behind my reasoning or the scholarship in the that I read, and will then realize, oh yeah, we were wrong in that.
So all I want to say is that the God of the universe, the God that made the universe, should be able to be unambiguous in his book enough that we can't have these two opposite conclusions found.
Yeah, exactly. But the
people at the time,
the thing is, he doesn't have to be.
The people at the time, can I say one second? The people at the time, when they weren't confused by this sort of thing. That's what I find so troubling about the diversity of thought in the 21st century. Back then, it was very straightforward. It was obviously a simpler time, and there wasn't this scholastic argumentation of this and that, like it doesn't mean this, doesn't mean that. Unfortunately, that thinking about the text has obviously been lost in translation. And unfortunately, when you have an institutionalized Christianity, like in this case, the Catholic Church, and then the Protestant Reformation afterwards, that then you start to look at the text through their lens, and that makes it even worse because now you've totally lost the context of the ancient Near East. And then that's why we have these different denominations today, and I sympathize with your troubles in that.
But should it not even be a thing in the first place?
Yeah, exactly.
It was written for a more universal time than when it gets translated or whatnot.
Well,
why do you
think Paul? In some way, it was revised in the New Testament, and that's one thing that I really don't get about Christians. How can you jump over Christ's teaching that it's not up to you to judge? It's not up to you. It will be judged in heaven by the judge. It is up to you to embrace your neighbor, to love thy neighbor, to... That's the New Testament. That's the whole point of the New Testament.
Right.
Any Christian stepping over that to get to Leviticus and the Old Testament to supersede Christ in some way so that they could be judgmental and
yeah, I think
you're wrong. I think Paul mentioned.
I just want to quickly say this, and then what I'll do is
sorry if I'm naive.
No. I think I'll help Paul with this example, and after I give this example, I need to go out for 10 minutes, and I'll come back.
General, I'm going to close it up pretty soon. So after you give this, probably do that, and
okay.
We'll let Paul respond.
Maybe this will help Paul. So, I'll give everyone an example of what Paul's trying to get at, and that is, remember a few days ago, G-Man debated the Council of Google Plus on 2 Corinthians 4, the notion of, does the God of this world mean Satan, or does it mean Yahweh? Now, G-Man thinks it's Satan. He can't think of, Yahweh being fit into that verse. But the council gave an argument that it's Yahweh. Now, there's an example where the verse can be ambiguous, and I will agree with you on that. Like, there's an example where it's even back in the early church, like you had someone like Pelagius who said, well, it could actually be both at the same time. And that's technically what the council is ultimately concluding, that Yahweh's in control, but it can be speaking about both. But here's the point. Yes, there are verses like that are ambiguous, but they're few and far. It's not like the entire text or the whole Bible. You have to keep flipping a coin in your interpretation. There are the odd verses here and there that do require continual investigation, but they're few and far. That's the point.
You're kind of begging the question, though, as to what is inerrant in the Bible, then.
Yeah, but we're going to keep going down this.
But at the same time, I appreciate Paul's honesty in this discussion. It's been, in fact, it turned out to be a pretty fruitful discussion.
Yeah, definitely.
At the end of the day,
funny, Robert, it's kind of funny because this hangout started out with like just you and I.
We had no intention at all.
Yeah, I know. Just you and I, no plan. We're just giggling in here. We have 3 viewers now. 3 hours later, we have 10 people in and a bunch of people watching.
Yeah, well, that's because you guys were ignoring me in the side chat, so I finally had to come in.
Sorry.
I guess, Robert, the only thing I would say to that is, I enjoy greatly, far more than any theists debating atheists, is always theist versus theist. And I watch debates of, is it faith or is it faith and works? And they both have their lists of verses, and I have to agree with both of them, that they both presented a case that it's like, wow, that I can totally see why they would interpret that list of verses, which is completely different than the other person's list of verses, why their position is correct. So, I guess, I understand you say that they're few and far between, but I've been in denominations. Can we baptize infants? Can we not baptize infants? Like these are not, they're not just trivial little nuances sometimes. Like, these are things that people go to war over, and that my great-grandfather was killed over because he was an Anabaptist and he shouldn't have been in the region where he lived. Like, this was not cut and dry at the time.
Paul,
right.
the God of the Great Debate Community, Steve McCrae, has arrived.
Okay, yeah, Paul.
Go ahead,
it's not always cut and dry, but that would be. But that doesn't mean, for example, that there's no right answer to the question.
I completely agree. Go ahead.
It would just mean that you would have to apply the same standard of interpretation to every passage, like to the faith and works passage. I think that there would be a consistent way to read and to interpret both passages in a way that respects the text. So it would just come down to how you are interpreting the text, like the historical grammatical method,
there might be another solution, which instead of leaving it to each person to interpret the Bible and read all the scholars, you could have a universal church,
Okay, I'm booting.
That was established by God.
I'm booting you.
In other words, the Catholic
Church.
I'm
sorry. There's just no way I'm getting into a Catholic debate right now because it's like 3 a.m. Steve, did you want to add anything? Because I'm about to close up. No? Okay. So yeah, Apologia, we should definitely get you in here again. I'd like to have a smaller hangout with like you, General, and me, or you and someone else with the 2 of us. I think that'd be great.
Sure.
So yeah, we can talk about that another time. But for now, thanks a lot, everyone, for listening. We are gonna get offline now. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Great Debate Community channel. Thanks for listening.
And don't